Hello, welcome to this encore episode of Impact the World for our Giving Month. We have a number of different organizations that my company donates to every month, and a few of those companies are people that I have been able to interview on the show. So for today's encore show, we are bringing back the episode where I spoke to Justin Hilton about his foundation, Safe Place International. Justin is an old friend, and he is someone who has always moved me with his readiness to be incredibly present and up close and personal in what some would find difficult situations or circumstances. Several years ago, he began his work with Safe Place International to really help marginalized refugees with a focus on those from the LGBTQ community and also single mothers. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Justin. You'll learn more about his story, why he felt compelled to do this work, and how this work has organically grown. And if you wanted to check out the organization or consider donating, you can use the link in the show notes. But for now, enjoy Justin Hilton. Justin, thank you so much for being with us. And you know, there's so many things that I know are probably going to come up in this conversation around the work you're doing, around the life you've experienced and your own spiritual journey. But I just want to share something before we start. Justin and I got connected through a mutual friend, the wonderful Deborah Evans. And I hadn't known you or your now husband, Pascal, very long. But I was very honored to be invited to your wedding. And to be at your wedding, I always think, you know, the best weddings, there's usually a certain magic or a certain love energy that can happen in a very amplified way. But yours was a whole other level of that. And the reason I want to share that is even in the brief times that we spent together in person, the thing that always struck me and still does about you is you have a very active, present, and deep desire to connect, like to really just connect and drop in and be present. So it was no great surprise that your wedding, the most memorable beginning to a wedding I've ever been at, where we were all of the guests, we were put into circles, and under the wonderful guidance of Rich and Yvonne Dutra, we were asked to eye gaze with every single guest for a certain amount of seconds as Rich spoke us through it and walked us through it, and then we'd move on to the next guest. So it was that beautiful thing at a wedding where you had actually looked deeply into the eyes and the soul of every other guest before the whole thing started. And that just, you know, it both set the tone for the day that you and Pascal invited us all to, but to me, it so epitomized who you are in the world and what you stand for.
Thanks for bringing that moment present. It feels really nice to re-experience that connection with you in this moment through the virtual realm.
Yeah. So here we are in the same state in America, but distant. And the thing that since your wedding, I was really struck by was, it was a couple of years later, because I believe Safe Place International, you began it in early 2017. And it has become this beautiful organization. The work you're doing is so important. I'm really happy that I can be a supporter every month. It's just a really great organization. But before we talk a little bit about Safe Place, I thought we'd wind the clock back and ask you really, where did that desire or energy for deep connection and presence first show up for you? Was it there since your very early life, or did it come as a response to early life? Because I'm just curious what your journey into consciousness and awareness looked like in the early part.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I remember as a kid, 8 or 9 years old, riding my bike around, trying to make eye contact with strangers in the street, freaking them out. And then as I became a teenager and moved out quite early at 14, having extended eye contact with my little band of runaways, sometimes with the aid of LSD, and always looking for what was beyond the personality, what was beyond the individual, and having some teenage sense of the flimsiness of identity. So was playing with that then, and was in deep search, aided by controlled substances back then, and by meditation later on. And then I think one of the parts that evolved in that was really noticing who was missing in these circles of communication. I mean, these of connection. So as I, navigated the workshop circuit and got to spend a lot of time at Esalen and Omega, and was even facilitating some workshops early in life, I started to notice that there were whole groups and communities that weren't there. And I felt a lot of pain around that. And I think that was the impetus to start examining issues around inclusion and issues around privilege. But yeah, it was the desire to connect in that pool of oneness where there's no separation that was pulling at me in my early life. And I think that allowed me to sort of navigate through some really externally painful situations, because I could always rest there, even if it was a awkward, messy rest. It was still a rest. And then, as that grew and evolved, just realizing that there was also a lot of work to do with how we as individuals be together, and a lot of possibilities in that realm.
How did you find, so being the invitee, if you like, or the one to give the invitation of this presence, this eye contact, which of course is just a way of the kind of doorway to the deeper connection. How did you find people as receptive or non-receptive to that? Like, what were the experiences you were noticing when you did that with people, both the ones who would connect and the ones who wouldn't? I'm just curious.
Certainly sorts people out really fast, so the ones that are up for it are really up for it and have often been looking for that as well, and the ones that are not up for it just think you're nuts and get away quickly. So I think some of my early friends were manic depressive or had psychotic tendencies, and sort of didn't have enough of an individual to contain, but as a byproduct of that could go all kinds of places. And so we would connect so deeply, and then they would disappear into the darkness of psychosis or of manic or of a deep depressive episode. So yeah, I think what I found is that most people were fairly defended, but that I would sort of go around looking for that, and I would find people everywhere that were also looking for that, and it was always a sweet connection, even though there wasn't a narrative around it then. There was only a narrative around it sort of later when I came to California and discovered the whole subculture that had quite a bit of story around oneness and connecting in that pool of consciousness and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's funny because as I'm listening to you, I'm remembering that was kind of my early experience with it. It would be the first kind of workshops I went to in my 20s. Outside, say, the theatre world that I was in as a kid, it was the first place I went where people were connecting very intimately. And then you were also having to learn the dance that if you'd been in a 3-day workshop, and you leave the workshop and you go back to the train station or the airport or wherever you're going, you learn pretty quickly to kind of draw it back down. Because the first few times I'd come out trying to connect with everybody who's like, I'm not in that space. That's not where I've been. That was my first awareness of the normal state and then the heightened state of connection. And where and when and with whom those things show up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, over time I've learned to be a little bit more sensitive and kind with those invitations, and sense, when they're wanted and when there's a natural sort of organic pathway to those connections, as opposed to where it's a bit of a jolt to someone. And also just respecting that people have the defenses that they do for good reason. And, definitely don't want to be an impetus to having them dismantle those defenses, in hopes of a safety that has not physically manifested in their life yet. People are living under dangerous circumstances on every level, and internally and externally. And so just respecting those limits and those, those conditions that are part of living in a body.
Totally. So speaking of, people who are vulnerable, and I'm curious, I know Safe Place in a way is at this point 4 years old, but for you, this has always been in you, this wanting to help those who are marginalized or underprivileged or vulnerable. This is something that has been a drive in you your whole life in many different ways, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think often we're interacting with physical manifestations of parts of us out in the world. Right. So early on, I worked with street youth, runaways, and did family reconciliation and AIDS education with kids, and just kind of general crisis suicide prevention counseling with kids. And then I worked with heroin addicts at a methadone clinic. And so, and then over the years, I've done a lot of work in schools with kids, and then training with folks that work with kids and work with other marginalized populations. And I've, sort of made my way around the world, finding those folks, and I was just doing freelance philanthropy that sort of snowballed into what looked like an organization, and then was sort of told, you should probably call it an organization so people would have a way to participate. So yeah, but yeah, that's kind of the evolution, I think, is continually finding those parts of myself in human form that I could, heal with and through.
So how are you feeling about it now? Before we go into the details of what the organization does, like you're 4 years in, how does it feel to you in the now versus, say, 2017? Just the experience that you're having of being one of the custodians and facilitators of this kind of organization.
Well, I mean, it's an incredible privilege. It's such a beautiful place to be. I think particularly in the last few years, when a lot of human darkness was amplified and a lot of sort of self-preservation and self-absorption was really being amplified around the planet. It was such a beautiful space to be surrounded by people who were making a decision to put service first, to put other people first, to be attuned to vulnerability, lead with their empathy, to really care about other people, and find ways to say yes to their desire to not be, a prisoner of fear, even when the larger culture was just, ringing fear from the rooftop. So it's incredible. And also the courage of people that survive horrendous circumstances makes me love the species more, to see. I mean, one of the most touching things for me is to witness that with the community members that we work with. Often we'll help people to get out of camps, and they're in a shelter with us, and within days they're thinking about, well, how can we get some more blankets back to the shelter? How can we get soap back to the shelter? How can we take care of the people that are still there, get them some extra food? And to me, this is just, so heartening, because I think, we often on the news are bombarded with images of the kind of worst mutations
Totally.
of humanity. And really the fact is, on the ground, there's so much beauty and there's so much generosity, and it's really prolific. It's everywhere. And it's at every level of society, from the micro acts to huge acts of generosity and service and devotion. And so to be in the middle of that is the best thing ever.
Yeah.
Like, that is just the best.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny, I'm loving seeing more and more independent or bigger outlets starting to put good news out into the world and transformation news, and basically allowing that energy to be seen and to permeate our consciousness rather than the negative or the fear story, or the kind of very one-dimensional and usually heavy or dark limited narratives we see. So for someone who has tuned into this show and is either watching or listening, and they heard me talk about Safe Place International a little bit in the introduction, how could you describe to somebody who is new to your organization what it is that you're doing and who it is that you're working on behalf of?
Yeah, so maybe just a quick little evolution of how it happened. So I was doing work with LGBT folks in southern India, and I was working with women and girls, helping them get out of institutionalized prostitution and trafficking, and working on education of women and girls in northern India and Nepal.
How did you get into that? Because how did that start?
I was traveling a lot around. I love India. I was traveling around Asia and India a lot, and found out about all the mass network of human trafficking, and that focused a lot on women and girls in vulnerable communities, poor communities in Cambodia and all over, and just started to try to support grassroots organizations that were making a difference around that. And then as I met one marginalized community, I would meet another. And there was just so much richness in becoming involved and sitting in circle with these folks and seeing what resources I could bring, and just being supportive where I could, and going there often, going about every 6 weeks to India and Nepal, and en route coming through Istanbul, which was kind of a favorite city of mine, and then starting to learn about the refugee crisis there, and not really knowing much about it, but just seeing it in the headlines of the Turkish air flights, and then stopping on a layover there and visiting a few grassroots organizations, and one of them, I was on a 3-hour layover, and I went into this one basement. It's a danky little tiny basement, and there was this beautiful Middle Eastern 22-year-old guy that had kids hanging off of him, and they were laughing and playing and pulling on him, and he was just such the most peaceful, sweet, generous soul I've ever seen. And that was the beginning of supporting Small Things Istanbul, and meeting my friend Aus, who later introduced me to many other activists, and brought me to have many other visits and support families and getting their children out of garment factories there and back in school. And then eventually, in one of my visits, a trans woman was murdered in Istanbul. She was beheaded while I was there. And so I came to find out that people that were escaping from, Cameroon, or from Uganda, or from Iran, or from Pakistan, and had, come across 5 countries to find safety, were again in danger from the people from their countries that were living, in Istanbul, and then also the right-wing elements there, and that they were often in their ostracization from their country and their people, were forced into sex work, which made them that much more visible and that much more vulnerable. And there were, at that time, no shelters in Istanbul, 15.5 million people, and no LGBTQI shelters. So we decided, naively, that we would just form one. And it took quite a while to find a safe space where that could happen. And we finally rented a 5-story building, and quickly grew from 14 beds to 21 beds, and then did a lot of outreach, and, faced a lot of challenges from the sort of devolving situation in Istanbul with the coup, and then the sort of expelling of foreign NGOs there. And at the same time, the work started just kind of in the same organic way in Athens. I went to Athens and met LGBT people that were on the street and really vulnerable, and a lot of homophobic elements there, even though, it's Greece and it's part of the EU, still a lot of racism, still a lot of homophobia, and tried to rent them a place. No one would rent to refugees, and no one would rent to someone who was going to be housing refugees. So bought an apartment there, and then of course that apartment filled up and then grew to 17 apartments. And then, as we saw the need, first it was about protection and basic needs, food, housing, medical, legal advocacy. And then we really saw the need for affinity, for connection, for love, for healing. So we started just bringing the houses together for picnics and playing Frisbee. There was 10 different languages, so people couldn't really talk to each other. So we would just play a lot of games, and we would dance and just be together. And then we realized, we have to have a community center. It's getting cold. And also, this is a large group of people of color in a very racist city, in a very public place. So we need a place that's safe. It's safe for everyone to come. So we bought a building and started, creating a space where folks that didn't have a home, that were on our waiting list, could come and take showers, do laundry, do internet, take classes, do theater, and that kind of thing. And up until COVID, that was sort of our center. And so we've grown from there and had some interesting turns. Part of how I started in Athens was I was just doing very random work. I would go and call the NGOs and say, is there anyone that needs help? And I would try to help those people. And so I would often go from Athens to Lesbos, which is a place where a lot of refugees arrive. And so I, in one of those visits, called this NGO and said, is there anyone that is called out and needs some special attention? And he said, well, there's this one guy, Joseph, and he's called us a lot. He's suicidal and sounds really upset. And he's at this really remote camp. I don't know if you can find him, but give it a try. So I did. I went to this remote camp, which was basically like these UN tents in the middle of the woods. And I got out of the car, and one of the first people I saw was this, not very tall Ugandan man with this huge smile, and instantly felt family with him. And so supported him and, helped him go to Athens. And the first night he got everything stolen from him. And then he went to go and work for an apple farm, and they didn't pay him. And so finally I was like, Joseph, what do you want to do? I want to support you in your dream. You deserve to have your dream. The backstory on Joseph is he was outed in his village. And, once he was outed, they told him to leave the village where he grew up. So he moved to Kampala, the big city in Uganda. And after he left, his sister and his mother weren't allowed to go to church or to school. So they called him and said, please come and get us. We're isolated here. And so he paid the elder of the village and came back to get them. And the night that he came back to get them, they were macheted to death and his house was burned. And he fled Uganda. And so he carries the pain and the guilt over his family's death. And also just there's a heavy influence of Christianity there. And so it was like he lost his family, and there was also the strong message that God was also angry and God was also rejecting him. So how he eventually reconciled this through many dark nights of the soul was that he was going to honor his mother and his sister's loss by service, and by reaching out and being there for his LGBT brothers and sisters. And so it was him that said, let's create shelters and safe places for these people. And every time I would go to Athens, he would be by my side because he was like my little brother, and I would want to make sure that he had all the things that he needed. And also he would take me to the places where the people were that needed help.
Mm.
And so he went with me to this camp. We you know, traveled to Lesbos, and he went with me to camp. It was February, and quite cold. And I'd already been in Istanbul, and I'd already been in Athens, and I was tired. And it was 7:00, and we were visiting with LGBTQI people and trying to work things out for them. And I wanted to go to the hotel, and he wanted to spend the night there. And so I let him do that. And I came back the next day, and he had spent the night with 2 lesbian women, 2 gay men, and a very pregnant woman in a very wet tent on the side of a hill in a camp that was made originally for 1,500 to 3,000 people and had 21,000 people, with inadequate sanitation and no water and just terrible conditions. And so we knew what to do with the 2 lesbian women and the 2 gay men. We had a shelter there and a group, but there were no organizations we could find that were working with pregnant women. So we brought a paramedic in, and she was 8 months pregnant and malnourished, and the baby had moved into position. So, the paramedic was like, "You can't leave her here. You can't leave her here. Whatever you're going to do, you can't leave her here." We're talking about 21,000 people, and all in really bad shape. But on the floor of the tent, we decided that we were going to change from being an organization that served LGBTQI refugees to being any refugee that was doubly marginalized. That was because she was pregnant from being trafficked. She was raped.
Right.
And so the reason that I'm sharing that with you is that Joseph basically adopted her daughter, who was going to be called Hope. And there was so much incredible beauty in the sharing of course, she was not the last pregnant woman. We opened 4 shelters subsequently that focused on women with children under 2 or women that were just about to have birth. And what we saw is that there was this beautiful exchange of the women who looked like the sisters and the mothers of these men who had lost their families, and who were saying, "You are holy men. Never has a man cooked for me and changed the diapers of my baby and stayed up and taken care of me." And for the men, ostracized by their communities, to have a woman from their culture or that looked like their family say, "How could you not be perfect in God's eyes? Yeah. Look at who you've been for me." So what we saw is that, these marginalized communities came together and offered each other so much healing and so much deep connection and affinity. And so out of that, I think, one of the things that we've really embraced is that connection and deep relationship is an essential part of the journey back from trauma, the journey back from unimaginable pain and suffering.
Totally. Wow.
Sorry, that was a mouthful.
No, thank you.
Take a breath now and then.
No, it's perfect, because I always have a few questions on the side, and usually don't need them. And one of the things I was really going to ask you to share was as an example for us of what some of the people that you're working with have been through. And that was, I'm curious for you, this is just a slight tangent, but it fits. I'm curious, obviously you're doing work that you feel completely purposeful about and you feel alive with, but are there ever times where, either now or in the past, the kind of level of suffering and trauma that you are involved with has kind of taken you off your center for a while, or you've had to, take a breath and kind of come back? Because I'm only asking that not so much because of what I know about you, because you seem very built for it for me, but I think I've spoken to people over the years who've said things like, "I would love to get involved, but I think it would be too hard on my heart," which I always think you can overcome for sure. But I know that that's often a fear for certain people. And I'm just curious how you've managed to navigate the impact that this will have had on you as well over the years.
Well, I mean, I'm in it to be impacted. I really feel like there's a level of suffering, in our sanitized Western culture
Totally.
that is just as brutal as what's happening in the refugee camps.
Mhm.
And the work that we do is about being affected by each other and being moved by each other, but also realizing that all of that happens in the context of deep love and support, but it's not so much about I'm going to go into those terrible circumstances and how will I preserve my tender heart or my sanity. It's more that, we're all in this soup together, whether we like it or not. And, I don't think it's actually more hot in those communities, certainly in environments of war, in environments where, people are actively being killed. There's a lot of trauma and I'm not built for that, but, for the work of, working with people that are severely marginalized. Yeah, I find I see myself, I feel myself, I see all my Western brothers and sisters in their pain, and I also see that they have a tremendous amount of strength and light and wisdom to offer. There's just a level of self-absorption that we are, all a slave to in the West, or many of us are a slave to. I know I've got it. What do I want? Does this feel like, is this really aligned with me? Is this the right relationship? Am I fully expressed? And it's like really liberating to be with people that are like, yeah, I don't have a place to live. I don't know where I'm getting my next meal, but I'm here with you and I'm grateful and I'm looking in your eyes and there's just an exchange of joy, So I think that it's never a one-sided equation. I think anyone that works in this space would say the folks that are coming from privilege are getting the better deal, are receiving more,
Totally. I assumed that was what you were going to say, and the people I know who have been doing work along the lines of what you do, it's the most alive, purposeful, like, it's the most real. And it's weird. It takes me back to in my early 20s, going to my first self-development workshops. And, I'd come back and describe it to people. It'd be like, what was happening? Well, then this woman was crying for an hour and a half while we all held her and they were horrified. And to me, I was like, this was real. Like this,
totally.
I could always feel that in the room under the surface, hidden under words that weren't matching up with the emotion. So I assumed that was what you were going to say. And I actually think that, most people I know who I've spoken to have had that hesitation when they have thrown themselves in.
Right.
They've been amazed actually how easy it is to kind of align with it or find your strength or actually get strength from the fact that you're in a very alive, very real, interactive situation rather than a dead thing.
Yeah, no, and I think, living in Berkeley and walking by people in wintertime that were sleeping on the street and watching other people walk by, there's something about realizing that we've totally been conditioned to not empathetically or emotionally connect to the people around us or our world. And that's horrifying, as a dad, when I'm walking with my toddlers, I don't want to teach them that there's people that matter and there's people that don't matter. I don't want to teach them through my actions or through my inactions, and so I think it requires that we find that congruency, and it's messy and it's hard, because the need is, looks endless and looks dangerous, but I think it's territory we have to go into. because it's also where our juicy, alive intimacy and our connection with the divine lives too, in that dangerous place.
It's funny, isn't it? Because that very self-absorption you just mentioned, it completely goes away when you're aligned. Like when you're in something that's just flowing through you, and it feels like the thing you are supposed to do, all of that just disappears. But what strikes me, it's funny, as you were describing the shelters and the groups that you're working with, and the healing that's taking place for them with each other, and their trauma is starting to move, but you're creating these places where they can all be. It's really important because the energetically, how I see it is, there are people who need help and who need support, who aren't getting it, and so you're providing a place for that. But the more they become empowered, and the more they find themselves again in a more sovereign way than what they've been forced into or pushed into or rejected into, just the ripple effect that's going to have on the whole planet, and what they themselves are then going to embody, and how that will energetically change the world, which sounds very what's the word, woo-woo if you like, but to me that's how I see energy working all the time. So as I was listening to you, there's the immediacy of what you're doing, which is really important, but then there's the energetics of a large number of the collective wanted to abandon these people, and another group in the collective said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to recover them. We're going to bring them back. They're going to recover themselves. There's something about leveling the playing field that way that just, for me, speaks to do what you can. Like if there's something that's upsetting you in the world or bothering you in the world, it's very painful to stay upset, to stay annoyed, to stay judgy about something. Like it's like, turn that energy into some action, however it looks, however small, however big.
Well, I mean, you're a living example of that. I think that you're constantly creating the world that you want to live in, and I think we share that is that, and part of it is just because it's too excruciating not to do that. It's too excruciating to live in a world that is doesn't care, and also that doesn't listen to its impulse, that its desire to respond. So I think that you model that so beautifully. When you have a desire to respond, you follow it, and you let it have you. And this is the opportunity for us. Like there's not, no one needs to have a Messiah complex and think that we're going to end, the suffering of humanity. But when we do feel that call inside to reach down and give some money, or to make eye contact with someone, or to make sure that they're covered by a blanket or whatever it is, or to explain to a child who they are and what's happening, when we feel that impulse, if we don't respond to it in the affirmative, something gets covered, something dies in us, and so I think this is like the opportunity, and it doesn't cost us. It's always a get. It's a get to respond to that,
But it is quite natural to have that resistance, or that moment of, oh, this is territory I've not been into. It's like that jump out the plane moment.
Right.
There is a part that you go, hang on a second. But most people who do it.
This is a perfectly good plane. Why am I getting out of it?
Will this parachute work? I hope so. But the exhilaration and the liberation we'll go through. It's so funny you just said that, and it takes me back. I feel like there was a game-changing moment for me around 2016, so 5 years ago, where it was a series of things that led me to a point where I realized, and it was partly, my channel as well, said you have to accept the suffering in the world to be of any use in the world. And I caught the part of me that had been wanting to deny that, wanting to resist it, wanting to not see it too much. I'd see it a certain amount, as much as I can handle. And it was really interesting because as soon as I realized, like, something went off in me, and then from then on I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see this place for everything it is. And then after a little while, I felt like I became a bit more useful or a bit more productive as a result of that acceptance, if you like. And I think when you're fighting that, it's very painful for you, and it disables your productivity or your usefulness. I get it comes from trauma, it comes from things that aren't yet in place in our life for us to have that moment, but that's a pattern I've seen with many people.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the physical attributes of that is denying our own mortality. I look down at my hands and I say, yeah, one day soon they're going to be stiff and blue, and just like really realizing that we're in these bodies that, in no time at all will be lifeless and without spirit infusion. And so being present to death allows us to really, jump, because I often think, okay, if I'm looking into this moment from my deathbed or from a time, in a few decades when I can't move my body, what opportunities would I jump to? What kind of joy would I experience in my body rolling around with my toddlers? Or what way would I show up and take a risk with the community members, or in just speaking up, and saying, hey, there's a real chance for us to live in a different way together. So I think, that embracing the suffering that there is, and embracing also what's, the elephant in the room. It's so obvious, but we all work quite diligently and collectively to deny that we're just, stopping by. This is very temporary, and these bodies that we've come to love and these narratives that we live through, just a little while and they'll be gone.
Totally. So true. So true. So I have a question for you about your journey with Safe Place, which I'm sure there will be people listening or watching who will be inspired by your experience and your journey with this, maybe to do their own thing, their own version of, what can I do to help? How can I be an advocate? How can I serve in this way? And maybe a very different area that the viewer or listener want to go to. But what advice would you either give, like yourself 4 or 5 years ago, or someone starting out wanting to go into this kind of organization, creating something like this that's there to support those who need the service, the help? What are the things that you might share with someone if they were saying, hey, I've got an idea, I'd love to start an organization or a charity in this area? Are there any things that you now know that perhaps you didn't at the beginning?
Yeah, well, if I was going to speak to me a few years ago, I might have said to go slow and to really listen, and to know that whatever I was doing at a particular moment was enough. Because often when I was confronted with enormous pain and need, I would go into my head and think, oh my God, I need to go much faster. I need to work much harder and do much more to make a difference. I'm not making a big enough difference. But just to remember that whatever you're doing is almost unquantifiable. We all have like the second grade teacher that believed in us, or the person that said that one thing that changed our trajectory. And if we're all willing to be that person, it might be just the smallest things. It might just be saying hello. It might just be picking one family that you look out for, or one child, or one, older person that's living on their own, or just going to volunteer at the food bank, or just in some way reaching out. So I would that's what I would say, is that just to be grounded in whatever you're doing is enough, and just to listen for what the next step is, but to watch the tendency to be on an egoic crusade. Just to keep moving from the head to the heart. Like, okay, so what do I need to do now? And am I really ready to, open 20 shelters, or do I just need to like work with the people in front of me? And out of that, great things will naturally and in a healthy way grow, And the other thing I would say is enjoy collaboration. Like, one of the best parts of doing this work is we share with other NGOs. So we have a great partner, Levi's, who gives us tons of great stuff. They gave us 611 boxes of stuff a couple months ago. And we only have 100 people that we shelter. So we shared it with all these other NGOs, and we have a supermarket that gives us all of their aging, products. And, they're only good for 3 days. So we share them with other NGOs. And then as a team, collaborating with others, sharing each other, teaching each other, and letting other people come in and give us trainings. I think that there's so much joy in not being on a sole mission, but saying, I have this, I'm just holding one little piece, one little grain of sand. And that's going to be my contribution. And I'm just going to look to see the ecosystem that I fit into. And then I'm just going to be in that ecosystem doing my piece. And I'm just going to feel into how I can be a better and better, more surrendered part of that ecosystem, rather than, I am going to conquer this. I am going to end suffering. I'm going to re-engineer poverty, because it's certainly that energy is great for building iPhones and all kinds of technical advantages. And certainly it has its place in structural changes in an oppressive culture. But I think also balanced with, let's do this together inside of a system that mirrors the planet we would love to save. Let's listen to how nature works and see if we can do this together in a way that is deeply listening.
Collaboration versus domination. And it's funny because you the word you used is the word that I remember all the time. Surrender. Like, whenever I've worked with creatives or healers who are wanting to get their thing out into the world, and it's my job to coach them or teach them, one of the objections that comes up commonly for us as human beings is, I'm not ready, I don't know enough, and the answer is, you never will. You'll never be ready, you'll never know enough, but you have to get in and start swimming. And once you get in, like you said, listen, because if you get in and think that you're in charge, you're on your own. You're not in relationship to the people you're serving, you're not in collaboration with the team that you're with. But it is the ultimate self-growth journey when you commit to kind of giving yourself to something that's bigger than you, but letting that thing change you as it teaches you how to change. And that to me is the beauty of it, of being an active creator or participant in the world. It's like, for me, I used to go to self-growth workshops for many, many years to kind of get my initial healing going and get my engine running. And now I'm like, well, every day is self-growth if you're actively listening and paying attention and responding. And that's beautiful to me about the whole thing.
Yeah, no, and I think, you're a great model of the beauty of the divine dancing with humanity. I think that what we know from our own experience is that humanity is adorable when it's infused with the divine, that this is what we love, is imperfection. We love all of the quirky, insecure, unhealed parts that are just saying yes and being infused and animated by the divine. Like, this is what it's all about. So I love what you said about this notion of being ready. It's kind of ridiculous, because what we actually love about people is authenticity. That's what we love. And that comes from, the observer moving out of the way and us just being our, unfinished selves, totally. Which is this mixture of like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And what a wreck, Both of it, yeah.
Yes.
So,
which is kind of like 2021, like beautiful and a wreck all at the same, you know, and that's the other thing that, you know, it took me probably until my 30s to kind of grasp this one, that again, it moves you away from self-absorption. Yes, we're all unique, but yes, we're all totally connected. And yes, we're all very uniquely a product of this time. Like this is a time like no other on earth in 2021. And so too will 100 years from now be, when we won't be here anymore. So that's always fascinating to me, like who we are in the ecosystem because of the ecosystem. However individual we might get in our own minds sometimes, is such a myth.
No, so true. So true. Yeah.
You have 2 children at home who are probably in charge of you right now, I'm suspecting. How has that been parenting lately? I'm just thinking, because you know we've everybody's been at home, and how are you finding the journey of parenting, because they're so connected?
Yeah, well, I feel, you know, I there's no way I would have not gone to Greece and made these trips to Europe every month, like I was doing before COVID, without the pandemic. So I'm actually really, really grateful that I got this year to just be here every day and have them know exactly where I am. We homeschooled them, and we had a teacher come in, and there's just something about being in the same house together that's been incredible. They're doing preschool now as of a couple months ago. It's beautiful. And I learned so much from them, and they keep me honest. They're constantly busting me. They said, they'll say, the way you said that wasn't kind, they'll say, they'll sit down and they'll say, I'd like you to say some kind words to me now. Or I'd like you to slow down. You were too fast with that, and so it's just great, because I'm constantly saying, you're right. You're right. You're right. And they're completely unreasonable a lot of the time, but it's such a joy, it's such a joy. And just, realizing that there's no pretending that who I show up is what they're going to be left with. Like who I actually am is what they're going to be left with. So I can't act as if, I actually have to, whatever I think is in the way, move through that and be real and engaged and present and alive, or not, and cop to it. I have to show up, because this is all I have to offer them is, as a dad, is myself. And so it's I think we'd probably agree that the impetus for growth is usually great love for another human being, whether it's a partner or a child. And relationship is what actually pulls us forward to the places we probably wouldn't go on our own. And that's certainly true, with being a dad.
Yeah, amazing. And this seems sidebar-y, but it comes to me to ask you this, because I know you're friends with many parents, and I'm curious, like, what do you think it would be a really kind way for parents to treat themselves at the moment? Because all the parents I've known all my life are often so hard on themselves and so exhausted, and trying to do everything, and and it's just it's a hard job. And I know, especially in this last year, with some of the people that we're close to who've got the kids at home and they're not used to that, just the pressure. And I'm curious, with all of your work of being present and connecting, and I'm curious, and being a parent yourself, like, what do you think is one of the most important things that parents right now in 2021 could do with, or could help themselves through?
Yeah, well, I just think a lot of self-compassion, for sure. And I have a friend that she does unschooling, and she's an adamant attachment parent, and she often will call me and talk about how she's being critical of the terrible things she did. And I said, I feel really great when I pick it up, because I'm helping them cultivate compassion. Like I don't want to give them the idea that them or anybody else is going to be perfect, because they're going to go out of the world, it's going to be different. And so I just find great comfort in us being real and vulnerable, and being grouchy or short sometimes, or being impatient, and then just saying, yeah, the way I did that was not the way I want to be with you. I love you so much, and I'm so sorry that was rough. Because they'll really express passionately, like, you didn't hear me, you just rushed me forward, and it's just really good to stop and say, you're right, you're so right about that. And so for me, it's just part of the journey, is really constantly screwing up and just being real about it. Like, this is what we're modeling. We're not modeling a utopian world. We're modeling, how do you be with all the stuff that comes up in relationship, and all the disappointment, and all the different wants and needs at a particular moment. Like our, I think parents often optimize for one or two things, and Pascal and I optimize for relationship. We want our kids to have deep, sustaining, quality relationships. And so for us, it's like, that's about working, getting down in the mud and working through it, processing it out. She took your train, she broke your Lego. She did. Right.
But I love hearing, I love the permission that your kids have to speak to you in that way, because that's what's been modeled and invited, and I think I'll speak for myself, coming from a loving family, but not a family where emotional communication was in the air at all. And of course, me being starving for that, it made me do the work I ended up doing, I guess. But I love hearing that, because that's so important, that level of honesty and vulnerability, and because we invite each other to that. I have that experience. When I first met you, I remember meeting you, and you were just like, hi.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can slow. Oh, okay. Oh, I'll slow down, and I can, but I had to adjust, because you were not the norm, even in my circle of people where that was the norm. I met you in the context of a restaurant, and so it's just so interesting that I think the permission slips that we give each other, we then birth something that we can then take out to the world, and it spreads. So it's really important for kids to be able to have that freedom of expression and emotional intelligence, if you like, or language around it.
Yeah, and just the level of awareness. They're kind of like the minor birds of awakeness, because there's a lot of violence that goes on with twins. There's a lot of scratching and biting and hitting and stuff. And so, often I'll restrain one, and so the feedback will be, you didn't need to grab me that quickly or hard. You could have grabbed a lot softer. And so I can see myself go to rationalization, and then I just often go, you're right. I had some charge there that was unnecessary, or I had some belief that if I grabbed you in a little bit more quicker, harder way, that you would get, that was a terrible thing to do. And so, and that's actually not what I'm subscribing to, that, some subtle violence is going to prevent violence, So it's great. It's great to sort of be humble and constantly, realize, I think that, and then we do that for each other, we can kind of call each other to, hey, look, this is happening with us. Is this what we want? Is this what we're committed to? And just name it in such a safe way. And we have, to have that consent in relationship, to be like, we're in the sandbox together. We're not trying to look good. We're just, trying to wake up together. That's our mission here. So I think that can be a great support.
It's a relief, I think, when you find that, and when you find someone you're compatible with in that too. I remember when I first met Stephen, and the thing that we did at the very beginning was kind of told each other all our horror stories, you know, like all the parts of, and the funniest thing was we'd tell one and then you think, and then the other one, because we were writing for weeks before we actually met, and the other one would go, I loved that you shared that, thank you, here's mine, and it just built and built and built, and so it's like, oh wow, this is rich growth territory right here.
That's amazing. That's really amazing.
Yeah, it is the best, isn't it? It is, but I also know that you have to be in a certain kind of position in yourself, or a certain level of support, or a certain amount of things in your life for that vulnerability to feel safe and to be supported, and to have had it modeled to you and through you enough times that you know that you can, like you said earlier on, it's not always great to force anybody into an intimate moment if their belief system, their level of trauma, the people that they're around most of the time is not going to support them popping into vulnerability. You know, it's important all of us find our way with it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, you know, what you described with Stephen, I would imagine comes out of an inner environment of a lot of love and acceptance. You know, just a lot of positive regard internally, which allows you to kind of open the kimono and say, hey man, I just want to like show you all this stuff just in case, you know, just in case you want to run now, here it all is.
Totally.
You know, because you're loving yourself and you've reached a peace with everything inside. And there's just a ton of internal compassion. And you know, I think that the important thing to remember is that for most folks, their inner world is not always a safe, warm refuge. It's often a harsh, divided place, and often an unknown place where they're afraid of ambushes. You know, and so I think it's important not to create sort of standards that are actually kind of counterindicated for the kind of environment that's currently existing in their inner world.
Yeah, because we never really know what's going on with somebody unless we have such a level of intimacy and transparency that they have shared that with us. And that's so important, especially at a time like now when volatility and emotional reactivity is high because of everything that's going on the planet. So it's interesting that we're talking about safety and vulnerability. It feels like the perfect kind of place to kind of bring our conversation to a close. But Justin, thank you so much for your vulnerability and your being a bastion of that, and willingness to go in and out of all the things. I know that you facilitated and coached alongside Debbie Ford, who was very much into shadow work, and I know you and Alanis Morissette have co-facilitated, and Rich and Yvonne and so many people. But that ability to hold that width of space is what we need more of in the world. And I also just love that you are doing that specifically for the marginalized communities who otherwise wouldn't have the help or the support that they need right now. And you can bet that those people are going to go and do some phenomenal things in the world, for sure, to just keep that ripple effect going.
Agreed. And thanks for being the bridge of this these other realms and the very human realm. And just really appreciate your insight and sort of the breadth and depth of your insight and your ability to be in all those spaces with softness and humor and gentleness and sincerity and authenticity. And so it's been great to get to spend some time just swimming around with you today.
Thank you. And I will just say, one of the things, I'm doing what I do in the world, but the organizations like yours that I can support with money that helps you guys do what you do in the world, it means so much. Like I'm grateful that there are people like you out there doing what you do, so that those of us who may not perhaps be able to donate time or be there in physical service, there's a way that we can help. And I just think that's a really brilliant thing. So thank you for doing what you do. And for everyone who's listening or watching who would like to take a deeper look at Safe Place International and see what they're doing, you can go to safeplaceinternational.org. And there you're going to find all kinds of information and some great photos about the projects and what's going on over there, and also a way that you could donate if you wanted to, or become a regular donor if it speaks to you. But Justin, thank you for not only doing what you're doing with Safe Place, but being here to kind of talk to those people who might be at the beginning of their own journey of setting something like this up. Some of the behind the scenes is really interesting to know because it's
Absolutely
very specific.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the ways that you contribute. Like, you know, it's so impactful and it's so powerful having people like yourself have our back, have my back. And we're a small organization and we notice every contribution and those brave acts of kindness, like giving your money and putting your money behind supporting someone you've never met. These are paradigm shifters. And so never want to sort of undervalue the potency of writing a check or contributing to something you believe in. It's a very powerful move.
Yeah, and equally, you know, I've got many people in my life and times in my life where money wasn't something I could give, but I could give something else, or I could send a nice email, or I could, you know, I could share it with some friends. So there's always a way that we can help. But that's the cool thing about us being here as one big tribe. Totally. So Justin, lots of love. Thank you. And to everyone who tuned in today, safeplaceinternational.org is where you can go and learn more. And we will, as ever, put links to the website in the show notes. Take care, everyone, and see you next time on Impact the World. Hi, I'm Lee. I'm an intuitive, a channeler, a musician, and you may know me from my monthly free energy updates that go out on YouTube and Facebook. You may know me from the Impact the World podcast, but I wanted to introduce you to my members community, The Portal. We've been a community now for 8 years, and my mission and the mission of my team every single month is to bring you wellness content, metaphysical content, anything that's going to support your life as a sensitive, as a healer, as someone who is newly awakening, but also to ground it in reality. So every month we bring you various tools to help you survive, thrive, and expand your life. I know many of you are out there bringing your own special gift or light to the world, and the Portal is a hub that we hold along with our community members to support you on your mission. Every month I do a live energy tune-up broadcast. It's 90 minutes long. It allows me to go deeper on some of the energies that month and how they are affecting our specific Portal community. I also take Q&A. I answer questions from my intuitive standpoint, and I also answer questions from my guides, the Z's, who I channel. These live tune-ups are always available within 24 hours. So if you can't make it live, you will always have the replay to go back and watch again, or to use the timestamps to visit a specific question that you heard that you wanted to replay the answer for. Every month, we will bring you a brand new audio recording. I often keep our community at the top of my mind when I'm creating a new channeled MP3 or a new energy alchemy meditation. And these are always scored and supported by the music of sound healer Davor Bozik. I also do several private behind-the-scenes video diaries. Sometimes these are what we're creating and what's going on here at the studio, but other times it might just be me at home talking about things that I'm noticing, really designed to give you and I an intimate conversation that I wouldn't otherwise put out there into the wider world. Stephen Washington brings you a special body energy update every single month. So Stephen is my husband, and he is also an amazing Qigong and wellness teacher. So I asked him several years ago to start creating some body medicine for us.
So he takes the themes of that month's energy update and he expands upon them and gives you a sequence of Qigong movements that are very gentle and easy for beginners, but it's a way of alchemizing what we're going through, and he does it beautifully. So many of our members love that component. Stephen also has many meditations inside the portal, which you can access anytime, and we are expanding our meditation library as these months go on. You receive a welcome bonus of the Intuitive Power live event. So if you've never seen a live event of ours, we had an incredible film crew document our London Intuitive Power event in 2019, and you'll get all 5 hours of that content as soon as you sign up. And finally, we curate special monthly Spotify playlists. 2 different kinds: music to move you, so things that are a little more dancey, and music to soothe you, things that are designed to help your nervous system calm. We love introducing you to new music, and this is curated by our whole team. The Classics Library is another important cornerstone of the portal. It gives us an opportunity to bring you 8 different MP3 recordings from my vast library, but we curate them as to the titles that might be perfect for you at this time. So if you want some extra audio, you can go into the Classics Library and pick a topic that suits you. Alongside several discounts to Portal members, our favorite thing is the energy of our community. So we have a private forum only available to members where you can share with each other, discuss, and learn from each other. So the portal really is a world unto itself, and it will keep expanding as the years go on. But there are some of our members who love every single aspect of the portal, and there are some who are there just for 2 or 3 things. So if you want to try it out for a month and see if it's for you, you can do that because membership is available to cancel anytime, and we look forward to welcoming you in the portal if you choose to experience what it is that we are curating and creating for you here.